Welcome back to Serious Talk Agentic AI. I'm your host, Greg Banks. Last fall, Google looked ready to run away with the AI race. By spring, everyone said Anthropic. Ask again now, and you'll hear a third name. That churn is exactly why 𝗪𝗿𝗄𝗃, COO of Cirrius Solutions, and Gavin Franklin, our head of custom development, are back for the home stretch of our Agentic OS mini-series with the kernel, the layer between your systems and the model, where Tim says your company's real IP lives. They get practical about skills and commands, the two portable primitives almost every major platform has now adopted, the 4 categories of skills, a walkthrough of one of Cirrius's most used skills, the common operating picture refresh, what actually breaks when you swap models or vendors. All right, let's get into it. All right, welcome back to Serious Talk Agentic AI. Tim and Gavin back in the studio. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. This is getting to the end of this little mini series we've been doing on the Agentic OS. This has been a tremendous learning journey for me. In fact, since we went live with the last episode, I've successfully fixed a lot of things to the point I had to re-audit and refix again, but in a much more optimized way. So I'm like all of our audiences are taking these lessons to heart. It's been a real good opportunity to learn. Today, though, I think is one, particularly when I look at the graphic that we're going to get into today, is going to be one that I think people are really going to want to download and take a look at. Tim brought this up when we kicked off the series talking about agent portability. Good Lord, as you think back over the news cycle this year, the race that all the different platforms are bringing and who's got the best feature set, and they seem to be in lockstep sometimes, and then some giant thing opens up. If you don't build this way, you're going to regret it. I'll go on record saying this right now, because at some point, the other feature set's going to be one you've got to look at. And if you've not taken some of these things into consideration as part of how you built what you're doing now, you're going to be paying for it sooner or later. So please heed the advice that the gentlemen are going to bring to the table today. Look forward to it. Tim, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. This is again, really impactful, I think, important topic. I think because I think it's been really clear from the last couple of years, there's this race between a few leading agent AI labs, whether it's OpenAI, Google, Meta, Anthropic, and whoever's in the lead, it's really hard to predict where it's going to be. And every 6 months you jump, it's like the race is in a totally different spot. I think if you would have talked to everybody last year, around like November timeframe, everybody's like, oh, Google's in a great spot. They're kind of positioned to overtake everything. They got this new model, Gemini 3 Pro in it, and then they're the most multimodal. Then you skip forward to the spring, you're like, oh no, Anthropic's running away with it. And then Anthropic had the kind of a fumbled 𝗙𝗵 5 release, some run-ins with the government, and then it's like, oh no, OpenAI is going to take it. So it's like, the state of change is still very rapid, and kind of determining, when you're looking at like, okay, where do I want to invest and build my agentic operating system platform? I think one of the key things you want to keep in mind is model portability. Even if you're staying on a single platform, the models are going to change within that platform. It was Opus 4.8, 𝗙𝗵 5. Now Opus 5 was released last week. If you're on like Anthropic, you just had the new 5.6 models from OpenAI. So even if you're staying in a single platform, you want to be model agnostic as well, but you want to have something where you don't have complete and total vendor lock-in. And I think determining what vendor or platform you go with is very, very important, but thinking that it's a no, like point of no return, we're crossing the Rubicon, there's no point of return decision. I think it's only that if you make it that way. And so today's episode is really about how do you build in, portability into your agentic operating system, and really, what are some key principles to keep in mind with that. So anyways, we determined for the title of this, the kernel. And this is kind of a reference to operating systems throughout development for the past several decades. And it'll probably resonate more with developers, but I think it's a really useful analogy. So Gavin, why do we pick the kernel, and how is it relevant to this?
Yeah, I mean, the more I keep digging into how we leverage our agentic pipelines, it's so similar to what we see operating systems has in the past, which is why I really love that we're utilizing this analogy. So essentially what the kernel is and what we're doing here is it's the layer between the hardware and the actual program that's being ran, right? So in the agentic pipeline, really that's the difference between memory and output, things that it's connected to. And the layer that is the kernel for us is how we interact with those, or how we allow the LLM to interact with those, right? Which is the program that's being ran in this instance. So to me, the kernel is everything that sits between your hardware and your services, as in between that and the LLM that's actually running the tools and the skills that you're providing it. So this is the skill layer.
Absolutely. And I think where this is really critical is this essentially too becomes your company's IP. So like this is really like the important piece where you're adding kind of your secret sauce, your bread and butter to take whatever platform it is that you're using, building in a portable way that you can take to other vendors. But this is really where the true value comes of these new tools that we have access to with large language models, with agent harnesses that you're getting with whatever platform you're picking. How you design your agentic operating system is going to be the piece where your company's layer, you are providing the most value in terms of making it fit your specific business. So with that, I think there's a few different kind of primitives that form the core or the heart of the operating system itself and a portable operating system. And those really started with Anthropic, specifically with like Claude Code, but now has been adopted across almost every major agentic platform across the board. And those are skills and commands. And both of those have become the core primitives used that form the heart of the operating system itself that really makes it specific to your company. And so I think it's probably useful starting first with the anatomy of a skill and then diving in, what's the difference between a skill and command? And why are both of these so powerful for becoming the heart of how you're building and managing your operating system within your company for all your users across the board? So let's start with a skill.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, a skill is a markdown file, and it is a set of instructions to be executed on whenever an agent wants to perform a specific task. So when we think about a skill, the first thing that's important with the skill is, when is the skill triggered? How is the skill triggered? So for that, we have things like a name of the skill, description of a skill, and various different tags that you can add to let the LLM know when that skill is going to be triggered. Ultimately, at the end of the day, even if you're using local tool like Claude Code, you're going to be sending these skill descriptions up to the LLM via API behind the scenes. And it's going to look at what you're asking and what it has available, and it's going to determine which one to go with or what action to take based off of the description and names of these skill files. And I ultimately see skills broken down into 4 primary categories. The first one is really your user-invokable skills and really your core skills. So these are things that may determine how you might connect to an external system. These are things that you may be utilizing frequently. So I want to pull daily notes. Then it knows that I'm going to execute the daily notes skill in particular. The next one I see is really a methodology. So we see this all the time with larger pieces of work that you need the LLM to do, whether that's building out our COPS. We see it today in our POC process. We have a methodology for building POCs. So when you talk about IP, this is where a lot of it falls, in my opinion, as in, how do we agentify our processes? And that lies within the methodology. And then we have your utility skills, which is pretty much just helpers, things in the background that other skills can call, things like PDF converters, page publishers, really not something you would invoke directly, but within the methodology, it might say, okay, well, let's actually go and create a page that's going to be hosted, baked into some of the methodology. And then we have contributor skills. So this is things that actually extend the operating system. And it can kind of variable how much you want users to have control over this type of skill. But if you want to add additional skills or allow for feature submissions to the agentic pipeline, this is what I would consider to be almost like meta skills that actually work on the operating system itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those 4 types are really a good way to kind of break apart the different types of skills and think about the different governance structures you would need for each one of those. You really want to think about, how is your company going to govern creating new skills, vetting whether they're skills you want to adopt, and who should be required to adopt them, how do they access it, etc. So we've done a couple other podcast episodes on this where we've gone through how to add some layer of governance for your skills. But like in terms of developing your long-term agentic operating system, thinking through the governance structure of your skills, how you're creating them, how you're managing them, how you're distributing them, is one of the core things that you're going to want to think through. And then having some way to break apart and identify, what are the different types of skills you're going to have across your operating system, like the 4 types that we just talked about here, I think are really it's a really useful framework to leverage. So the other main primitive that we have outside of skills, again, we're boiling this down to some more basic components. But again, these kind of comprise the biggest bang for your buck. If you put most of your time into anything, put your time into managing skills and commands. So commands is the other main primitive. It has some overlaps with the skill, but also some key differences. So Gavin, maybe you want to dive into commands here, why they're different and why do they both exist?
Yeah. So really at its core, skills and commands execute in a similar fashion when it comes to the LLM, right? You're still providing context at the end of the day to what the LLM is going to be doing in a markdown file. What differs though is commands are explicitly triggered by the user or the operating system by saying / whatever the command name is. So this becomes really valuable in instances where you may have a long running operation that you want to execute every morning. So running that / command might be really useful either when you start your agentic process in the morning, or additionally, big power of commands is they can be scheduled. So you can schedule that process. So we use that for things like our cop refreshes, our daily notes, things that we come in and say, okay, we're ready for this information to be populated on a day-to-day basis. So obviously, what you really get from this is control on when it's executed. It's not ambiguous. It's not left up to natural language like skills are to the LLM. It's schedulable. That's a really big benefit in comparison. And then obviously, speed and predictability is a big one when it comes to these commands. You know exactly what's being ran. You can control very precisely what occurs when a user utilizes a command compared to a skill, which is more natural language based. And the LLM is going to decide when to execute the skill. So that's where you're really leaning on the agentic nature and decision matrix that an LLM utilizes to determine what should I do here based off of the user prompt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the examples I like giving to people all the time where maybe skills or commands are like newer concepts for companies is skills and commands are really becoming the new standard operating procedure or SOP for agentic driven companies, right? They're both ways to take repeatable processes that need to happen within a company and have a way to actually execute on them. But there's a few really key differences that I think actually take commands and skills actually take SOPs to a whole nother level. Everybody knows with standard operating procedures is SOPs are only as good as people choose to go ahead and follow it. And staleness of SOPs can happen very, very quickly. Skills and commands, if you start having the mindset shift of like, hey, everything that's repeatable, we want to move into skills and commands. It's great for multiple reasons. One is your repeatable processes can now be executed by both agents and people. Like moving everything into skills and commands allows your people to access and understand what to execute when faster. The other piece here is because things are moving into leveraging something like Git or GitHub to manage versioning in the governance we talked about into skills and commands, you now actually have better version controls and governance structures of your standard operating procedures than probably 90% of other companies ever had before. So now you have a way to really look as a leadership team or a management team of like, hey, what do we actually want to document and maintain? What tweaks or changes do we actually need to make to our SOPs? And then finally, like the difficulty of retrieving SOPs in determining, what needs to be done given situations kind of moves off the human a little bit, because now every human has access to an agent within your company if you build it around an operating system like this to be able to execute those SOPs. So think of like skills and commands are just essentially a newer way to roll out standard operating procedures to your companies, and each one has a slightly different kind of flavor. Skills, is where the model decides when or what gets executed, and then a command can be executed explicitly when a human calls for it, right? So they both have very specific ways, but they both work in very similar ways as well. But I think there's a few real key things to keep in mind when it comes to moving to this model, right? Now the danger, I would say, or a risk here is people have to understand what the skills and the commands are, what's available to them to even know the capabilities that they have. So training, change management, onboarding, they're just as critical as it ever was, right? Same with SOPs that get stale over time. If you don't train people and say, hey, these are the skills that your agent has access to, or these are the commands that you actually have access to, and here's what they are, here's how they work, here's some good tips or techniques for this, etc. You're going to get a lot less back from it. You can't, you might have the capability, but you might not have the competence in your organization. And then the next piece is I think leveraging skills or commands for things that aren't necessarily things that follow process or procedures, right? So you want to make sure you're using skills and commands in areas that are actually repeatable processes or areas that are actually good fits. Same as an SOP. Like put those in place for very repeatable processes, things that you're doing more than once. A good rule of thumb is start with everything as like a command. So, hey, I don't know if I want the model to decide whether this is going to work or not until I know it's repeatable. Then if you find yourself using that command / create a common operating picture / create a weekly status report, you do it a couple times, you're like, okay, this is something I am repeating, I'm getting value from, and I like the output. Now that might be a good trigger to then upgrade it to a skill and then get it into the repo for your rest of the team. So there's a couple basic governance things you could put in place there to really help with that as well.
Yeah, one of the other things I'll add to that is if you find yourself in a scenario where it's beneficial for you to do some sort of user interface wrapper behind these models or behind this operating system, commands become incredibly valuable there. For instance, one of the things that we do when you start a user story is it essentially just triggers a user story build command with that specific context. So it allows somebody to basically look at an individual user story and say, I want to start that, instead of having to make sure that that user story is connected to the current context and then explicitly calling out, let's start this user story, make sure you call this skill. You can just have a command be tied to a button push or some sort of operation within a UI, which is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe one of the next things we want to walk through is a skill running live, and just giving an example of how skills are a really good way to sequence your business processes. It's really good at not just executing something, but also sequencing a lot of various steps in a very specific way that need to happen for your business to result in some type of standardized output that you need to see. So one of the very common ones that we use across our company is the common operating picture refresh. We use common operating pictures for a whole bunch of business primitives. We use that for opportunities. We use it in terms of sales cycles that we're running on potential projects. We use it for projects themselves. We use it for accounts in terms of everything happening underneath a customer. And for us, a common operating picture is like a snapshot in time of, hey, based on all the things that we know across all our systems and what we're able to gather from the different signal layers, like we talked about a couple episodes ago, how do we see the current state of this current, let's say, opportunity or this current account? So we run common operating pictures all the time for different types of things. And like the comp refresh is probably one of our most used skills across the board. It helps standardize across the board. All our team members are seeing things in a very similar way, not just taking company specific data, but then also layering in their specific context that they have from their own vault as well. So it's specific to them as well. But in order to get a really good common operating picture refresh, you actually have to do a lot of things in a very specific sequence to get the output that you want. So it's a really good example of one of the things that we've iterated on over time and resulted in a really well-used skill. So Gavin, maybe you want to walk us through kind of the comp refresh as an example. And again, like this example could apply to any type of business process that you're using across the board.
Yeah, just a high level overview of our comp refresh. We essentially break it down into 6 different steps, and it aligns very heavily to the process we would have as humans when it comes to evaluating where a current engagement is at. So imagine you're an engagement manager. The first thing that you want to do is, what projects am I aligned to? So the first thing we do is say, let's go into what it exists today in your memory in the vault that we utilize and say, let's first grab all the projects, their current cops, and understand what already exists. The second thing that we're going to do is do a pre-scan of our signal layers. We talked about signal layers last week. It's really just, did we receive any emails? Did we receive any Slack messages? Let's pull in everything that is connected to our agent that was updated. That way we have that to start sorting. And that's really the next thing, is this dispatch section. Now I've got all my items. What projects do they align to? What cops do they need to be organized? And at that point, you realize that you have however many pipelines as you have projects. So let's say you've got 5 projects. You've now organized inputs from all 5 of those projects into 5 different COP categories. This is when things like sub-agents become really powerful, because you can have an agent. Essentially, our fourth step is what we call fanning out, which is we have that one agent spin up multiple agentic sessions that then evaluate all of the inputs on that COP to begin to operate on our 5th step, which is writing to the COP. So it's going to synthesize the data from all the inputs that we've organized, and it's going to make updates to the COP now. And it's going to be doing that in 5 different instances if you have 5 different projects, inputs that you've gotten from that. And then finally, whatever we need to do to capture that those updates have been made. So whether that's a session scratch update, a COP refresh date MD file being created, all things that we want to capture as our 6th step.
Yeah, I love this example as a skill because, one, we didn't create this like all up front overnight. Like, this is one that's been updated, modified. I think almost every release update we've done to our own internal Cirrius Ops agent has had some type of update to the COP refresh based on feedback from people, etc. And now, too, it also calls and leverages other skills throughout the process. So it started as a kind of a standalone skill. Now it's been iterated on multiple times and also leverages other skills and or commands. It actually can call certain commands that are essentially sub-processes within it as well. So it shows you don't have to know your whole operating system up front. You just need to get started with mapping out what are the most critical things that we need to standardize today, and just start there. And then start iterating and improving your operating system over time. And it's going to grow and grow and grow until you're running a good chunk of your business through these standard operating procedures in a way that you could have really only have dreamed about before, using just documented standard operating procedures sitting in a PDF in your share drive, right? And so I think, as somebody like me who throughout my whole career, I've been focused on operations and operationalizing things, this is a great tool and method to use to help actually execute on procedures in a standardized way, that allows you to scale, get more efficiencies, and allow your people to be more productive and more effective. So like this one specifically, it calls multiple other commands that are signal layer gathering commands. So every signal layer now is its own primitive. So going and grabbing transcript notes, we use Granola for collecting transcripts. And so now that's its own command that can get called by other skills across the board. And now we can just manage the most efficient and productive way to go gather transcripts for multiple different ends just through that single command. So again, that's something that was added in a very recent release, but we have a governance framework that manages our skills and commands that allows us to iteratively improve across the board. And you're going to get this more robust IP layer around your agentic operating system over time. But the key is you have to get started. And you have to have the governance layer to be able to manage that. So I think that's a really important thing to call out. So then lastly, I think, why does leveraging and making skills and commands and the governance structure around those, the core of your agentic operating system, why does this make your operating system portable? Right? Because we've been saying, hey, one of the main reasons you want to lean on these is because it makes it portable. So you're not locked into a vendor. So Gavin, maybe we want to dive in on that.
Yeah, everything we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks has really been a layered structure. Where are these things happening? Are they happening in our hardware side? When I say that, I mean, is it memory that's being stored? Are we updating some of our external systems like Salesforce, like writing an email, calling out to those services? That's the layer that is the output or the input, right? The hardware process. What we are talking about now with skills is what we are saying is the kernel, the interaction between the software, which is the LLM, and our actual data sources. The power here is that when you write skills, there's nothing special about a skill file that says this skill file can only be leveraged with Claude, can only be leveraged with OpenAI products. It is simply a markdown file. It's superhuman readable. So that becomes incredibly powerful. So when you think about swapping freely, it's really just, well, here's your set of skills that you need access to as an LLM. And so you have a lot of flexibility to be able to move between them.
Yeah, absolutely. But then there are a few things we want to keep in mind. Okay, these pieces are portable. Okay, I build skills, I build commands, I build some sub-agent instructions. There's a couple other things we've talked about that can be model portable. But there are a few things that actually can break on a model swap as well. And so I think that's good to know kind of on the backside as well when people are looking at like, okay, hey, where are we going to land our overall agentic architecture? What are some of the things that are going to be more specific to whatever platform you land on? So, hey, yes, invest time there, but no, that's not part of your specific IP to your business. You're probably going to have to go rebuild that if you go somewhere else down the road as well.
Yeah, there are absolutely things that I would say are model specific, particularly around how a model knows what tools to call, whether that's a skill, whether that's an actual service, which is really done through a skill. So that tool call format can be different. So a skill file that is structured in a way that Claude understands is slightly different than a skill file that's structured in a way that any other tool might understand, right? So what's important here, though, is the actual meat and potatoes of the skill is portable. And honestly, the shifting over from one LLM to another with those skill files is not that large of a challenge. And it's made even more simplistic with AI. So it's really the way to do it. If you're working with Claude Code, you want to port over to Codex. Both of them have the capability of taking a file structure and MCP tool calling that looks like what Claude Code would utilize and porting it over to Codex capable. Now, another thing you're going to start missing if you're utilizing some of these tools, let's say you're working in Claude Code and you've enabled a granola connector, for instance, that connector is going to have to be enabled whenever you shift over to Codex. So really the layers in between are things that are going to need to be updated, but it is not a challenging process, especially when you have AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also, we've talked a lot about Anthropic and OpenAI because they're two of the leaders in terms of, agent, or model labs right now, kind of leading the charge. And they've really settled on core primitives with skills and commands that are very portable with Markdown, but not all platforms and not all agent frameworks have settled on those. I'd say most of the major ones have. So again, I think when you are looking at, there's a lot of kind of niche, maybe industry specific agent frameworks or tools. There could be smaller up and coming that are maybe cheaper options as well. Like be careful, vendor lock-in can become real if you're aligning with a tool or a platform that does not align to some of the industry standards, so to speak, that are starting to kind of get created across the board. So if something's not running off of something around skills or commands, or not adopting MCP as its protocol for integrating with other systems or tools, those are probably amber flags in terms of, the potential for a lock-in then and not having model portability across the board. So I think, just kind of as a final thought there, is keep that in mind, right? You want to try to stick to a platform and tooling that adheres to largely accepted industry standards as much as possible to maintain that portability. So you spend the most time focused on building out your SOPs and building what your IP in a way that can move with your business wherever you go. And you're putting time into the parts that's actually driving value for you. So I think that's a call out we kind of wanted to make at the end as well. And so to kind of recap where this fits into everything else we've been talking about with the agentic operating system, this is the last pillar of the 4 pillars we talked about at the beginning. These are the critical things that a business needs to do to have an agentic operating system across their company. We started with talking around the different signal layers and how you need to pull signals into your agent to start providing it context on what it needs to know. Then we talked about after that the context flow. So now that we have that context, what is the flow of that context to actually get it to a usable output for your agent? And then that becomes memory. Memory is actually how it's seen both decisions made in the past as well as the current state of how it sees different things acting. And then that wraps up today with model portability. We're going to invest all this time into creating your agentic operating system. You want to design it in a way where you avoid that vendor lock-in, where your IP is actually invested and where the business value is for your business. And we think that really resides kind of with where things are today around primarily the skills and the commands that you're using to drive the business processes that you're trying to agentify. So kind of going full circle, recapping where we have traveled over the last few weeks, but really this is where we've landed internally as well. Like these are the 4 pillars or foundations that we're rolling out for customers. as well as that we're building around with our own internal agents, with our Cirrius Ops agents and our Cirrius Dev agent.
Yeah, I would just say when it comes to agentifying a process, really at the end of the day, the core problem is understanding your process. That is going to continuously be an issue. We go through process diagrams all the time in Lucid, things of that nature. And if the question I ask first is, what percentage of your life cycle do you think actually falls within this process, or how often are we going outside of it? And if it's above 33%, then it's going to be really rough adopting an agentic pipeline, to be honest, because you're going to have to get your people aligned to a new way of working before you even agentify it and see success in that. So absolutely, process is king here.
Yeah, guys, this has been a fun thing for me to watch and listen to. As we kind of talked in the intro, that I'm a little late adopter of some of these things here, but hosting the podcast, learning from you guys, trying to apply the things I'm learning week by week. Gavin and I were talking earlier about seeing some old friends over the weekend, and nobody I was talking to is in the tech space. So I was trying to explain things to them, and I said, here's the best way. I kept saying my agent. They go, your agent? What are you talking about? And I think back, Tim, to some of the earliest episodes we did with Chad. And one of the ways he categorized this was having a helper, having an assistant. And that's kind of how I've made him understand. Is like, if I were to hire an assistant and start transferring some of my duties over to them, I might start out with something like a command, like it's a really simple document, follow this list. But as they get more built out, get more understanding of that, I'm going to get more and more responsibility over to them. Those things turn into a skill where, like, anything client facing, I can handle them. That skill might cover all that stuff. But it's really about teaching a helper to do the things that your brain does. You don't realize how it organizes, sorts, clears, tries to optimize, all that stuff, trying to teach your agent to operate the way you think. And in some ways, your agent's going to make you think better, because you have to be more disciplined than you are with your brain. But it's been a fun thing for me to go through. Again, guys, these artifacts, I'll link all the artifacts to everything from this series in this episode, so you can get them all from one place if you want. But this one today really talks about portability and the value of that. And I think when you see visually how these layers are set up, as we talked about in the beginning today, it'll really click with you. But hopefully this is resonating with the audience. We'd love to have your feedback on it. Again, we'll say it every time. If you're in this conversation and you just don't know where to go, in the show notes, there's a link to reach out to us at SeriousTalk@SeriousSolutions.com. We would love to sit down and talk to you. I can personally attest in having private conversations with Tim about things he's been doing and seeing how this has evolved over the last several months into our agents. It's been fun to watch. And when you get your hands on and play with it, it's even more fun. So we look forward to bringing some more to you soon. But thank you, Gavin and Tim, for really breaking this down. This OS is a great way to think about it. I can't think of a simpler way to break down all these pieces that we've learned over the last year, and I look forward to seeing where it goes next. So thank y'all for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
See ya. Well, that's it for today's episode of Serious Talk Agentic AI. My sincere thanks goes out to Tim Harding and Gavin Franklin for the way they brought our Agentic OS mini-series home. Tim reframed skills and commands as the new standard operating procedures, version controlled, governed, and executable by people and agents alike. And Gavin walked us through a real one. All 6 steps of the common operating picture refresh, from pre-scanning the signal layers to fanning out sub-agents to write the updates. Gavin then grounded the entire portability argument in one plain fact. A skill is a human-readable markdown file, and it moves with your business wherever you go. That layer between your services and the model is where your company's IP belongs, and it stays yours no matter who is winning the model race. If this series has helped you shape your own agentic operating system, subscribe and leave us a review. It helps the show reach people building these systems. The show notes gather the artifacts from across the series, including today's portability graphics, so you can grab them all in one place. Special thanks to Jason Fowler for allowing use of his song, Mystery Road. And if you're in this conversation, you just don't know where to go next, reach out to us at SeriousTalk@SeriousSolutions.com. We'd love to sit down and talk with you. We'll see you on the next one.